The FBI arrested a man in California who sent a ransom demand to the family of a missing 84-year-old woman. That arrest made national headlines. It was supposed to feel like a breakthrough. But here is what nobody is telling you clearly enough. That arrest had nothing to do with finding Nancy Guthrie. The man they caught was not the kidnapper. He was not connected to the real abduction. He was someone sitting at home in Hawthorne, California, watching this case unfold on television, who decided to insert himself into one of the most painful missing person investigations in recent American history. And that single fact tears open a much darker, much more disturbing layer of this case that most coverage has completely glossed over. Let that land for a second. While a family was publicly begging for their mother's life, while Savannah Guthrie was standing in front of a camera with tears she could barely hold back and saying the words, "We will pay," to a kidnapper she had never seen, someone across the country was crafting a fake ransom demand, not to help, not to expose anything, but to see if a grieving family would respond. Think about that for a moment. Think about what kind of desperation or calculated cruelty leads a person to that decision. And then ask yourself this: if someone like that could so easily find the family's contact information, trace their movements through public media, and send a message that briefly passed as credible, what does that tell us about the real kidnapper, who appears to have known far more? Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, the mother of Today show anchor Savannah Guthrie, was last seen alive on the night of January 31st, 2026. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, just before 10 p.m. He waited in the driveway until she was safely inside. That is the last confirmed moment anyone who loves her saw her. By the following morning, she did not appear for a church live stream she had committed to. By noon, family members were at her door. By early afternoon, police were called. What they found when they arrived set the tone for everything that has followed. A trail of blood on the walkway outside Nancy's home, confirmed by investigators to be hers. Her phone was still inside. Her medications were still inside. She was not. The Pima County Sheriff's Department almost immediately characterized this as an apparent forced abduction. The word they used was deliberate, not suspicious disappearance, not unexplained absence. Abduction. And the evidence supported that conclusion in ways that were deeply alarming from the very beginning. Surveillance footage recovered from Nancy's Nest doorbell camera showed a masked individual outside her home in the early hours of February 1st. This person was wearing a ski mask, long sleeves, and black gloves in the middle of a desert winter night. They were carrying a black Ozark Trail backpack, the kind sold at Walmart for under $20, the kind chosen specifically because it is generic and untraceable. This was not a random encounter. This was someone who planned it. Stay with me, because this is where it gets complicated. Within 24 hours of Nancy's disappearance becoming public, ransom demands began arriving, not through private channels, not delivered directly to the family, through the media. A local Tucson television station, KOLD News 13, received the first communication on February 2nd through its anonymous online tip portal. The note demanded payment in cryptocurrency. It included details about the crime scene, details that investigators said were not widely known to the public at the time. The FBI took that note seriously enough that a senior agent sat down with Savannah Guthrie and her siblings to record a video response directly addressing the person who sent it. That almost never happens publicly. When the FBI puts a special agent in charge in front of a camera and tells a family to answer the kidnapper, it means they believe the threat is real. Former FBI agents who observed this case from the outside described the ransom note communication pattern as highly unusual. Legitimate kidnappers almost never send demands through television news stations. They contact families directly, quietly, with information that proves they have the victim. The fact that these notes were flowing through media channels raised immediate red flags among professionals in the field. And yet, the content of the first note, particularly the insider details it contained about Nancy's condition and circumstances, kept investigators from dismissing it entirely. This is the contradiction that has defined every stage of this investigation. Nothing fits completely. Nothing can be ruled out completely. And that tension is precisely what someone like Derek Colella chose to exploit. Colella, 42, of Hawthorne, California, was arrested by the FBI after sending text messages to Nancy's oldest daughter, Annie Guthrie, and her husband, Tommaso Cioni, on February 4th, the same day the Guthrie family released their first emotional public video asking the kidnapper for proof of life. The timing of that detail is not incidental. The messages went out moments after that video was broadcast. Colella used a VoIP internet phone line registered to his own Gmail account, derekcolella@gmail.com, to send a message that read, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction." 3 minutes later, a 9-second phone call was placed from the same number to a member of the Guthrie family. Law enforcement traced it within hours. When agents arrived at his door, Colella told them he had been following the case on television and sent the texts to see if the family would respond. He is now charged with transmitting a demand for ransom across state lines and using a telecommunications device to harass a specific person. But here is what the headlines about Colella's arrest failed to communicate clearly enough. The FBI, even while announcing his arrest, explicitly stated they were separately investigating a different ransom demand as potentially having come from the actual kidnapper. Colella was the distraction. He was the imposter. Somewhere behind him, the real communication, the one that contained details no outsider could have known, was still sitting inside an ongoing federal investigation with no arrest, no named suspect, and no resolution. The Colella arrest closed one door. It did not open the one that matters. There were 2 ransom notes that investigators considered potentially credible. 2 out of multiple communications that flooded in from different directions after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance became national news. The FBI sorted through all of it and separated what they believed could be real from what they knew was noise. And what they found inside those 2 credible notes is something that has not been fully absorbed by the public, because law enforcement specifically requested that the contents be kept private for months. That request was honored. Until it wasn't. And when the contents of the second note finally became known in late June of 2026, nearly 5 months after Nancy vanished, the weight of what it said stopped people mid-sentence. The second note said she was already dead. According to sources familiar with the investigation, the second communication received by KOLD News 13, the Tucson CBS affiliate that had also received the first ransom demand, stated that Nancy Guthrie had died shortly after her abduction. The note, which arrived on February 6th, 5 days after she disappeared, claimed that her death was not intentional. It expressed what sources described as an apology, and it said that her body had been buried in nature. Law enforcement believed this note was a legitimate communication from the kidnappers, not a hoax, not an imposter, a communication they assessed as coming from the same source as the first credible demand. The FBI asked media outlets who were aware of its contents to hold the information. Most did. For months, the family was shown the note. Savannah Guthrie, in her first major interview after the disappearance, told her colleague Hoda Kotb that she believed the first 2 notes they received were real. She said, "I tend to believe those are real." She said it quietly. She said it like someone who had already begun preparing herself for something she could not yet say out loud. This is where things get serious, and this is where the investigation becomes something more than a missing person case. Because if law enforcement assessed that second note as credible, if they genuinely believed the communication came from the real abductor, then what they were sitting with by early February was not a kidnapping in the traditional sense. It was a potential death notification delivered through a news station's anonymous tip portal with no body, no location, no way to verify, and no suspect in custody. And a family was still publicly saying they would pay, still posting videos, still begging for proof of life, because what else do you do when you do not know for certain and the alternative is unbearable? The first credible ransom note had demanded cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, and included details about the crime scene and Nancy's condition that investigators said were not publicly known at the time. The amount that emerged in reporting was $6 million. A second version of a ransom demand, this one sent to the entertainment news outlet TMZ, reportedly demanded $4 million and described Nancy as safe but scared. Different outlets received different versions of demands with different figures. Former FBI agents who observed the case publicly noted that this kind of fragmented, media-targeted ransom communication was highly unusual. Real kidnappers do not typically broadcast demands through television stations. They want privacy, control, and a direct line. The decision to send notes through news tip portals suggested either someone unfamiliar with how professional kidnappings operate or someone who wanted the story public for a reason that served their own purposes. If you have been following this case, drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because this is the question that splits investigators and observers alike. Was this a planned, organized abduction by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, or was it something that spiraled out of control almost immediately after it began? The answer to that question changes everything about where the investigation should be focused and what kind of resolution is even possible at this point. Now there is another layer here that is only beginning to receive the attention it deserves. According to a report from the publication Airmail, investigators working the case are now re-examining a decision made in the very earliest days of the investigation, a decision that some inside the task force believe may have been a fatal misstep. Sources close to the case described this internally as the Big Jake theory, a reference to a 1971 film in which a grandfather refuses to allow kidnappers to profit from taking his grandson. According to Airmail's reporting, the task force had categorized the ransom communications into what they internally called the good, the bad, and the ugly. The original email sent to TMZ was treated as a serious lead, but after the first deadline passed without payment, another message arrived from the same IP address. That second message shifted from demanding a live ransom to offering to return Nancy's body for the same sum. Sources told Airmail that this became known as the bad email, and the decision about how to respond to it, or whether to pay, is now being viewed by some connected to the investigation as a moment that may have closed a window that will never reopen. Share this video if you think this story deserves more attention than it is getting. The details in this case are not reaching people the way they should. If you want to follow every development as it happens, subscribe now, because what comes next in this investigation is not going to be quiet. What makes that potential misstep so difficult to sit with is not just the outcome, it is the context. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker. She required daily medication for a serious heart condition. Her daughter Savannah said publicly, "She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer." The people who took her either did not know what they had taken on medically, or they did not care. Either conclusion is devastating. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas said plainly that given her age and medical condition and the amount of time that had passed, he was really skeptical that she's still alive. He did not say that to be cruel. He said it because in this kind of work, the facts have to be faced directly, even when they are the hardest thing in the world to say. And yet the investigation continued. Tips kept coming in. DNA analysis was initiated. Surveillance footage was reviewed. The FBI offered a $50,000 reward. The family raised that to $1 million. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show, but producers implemented a protocol where if any breaking news about Nancy's case came in while Savannah was on air, she would be quietly removed from the set and another anchor would handle the coverage. Because even going back to work meant existing inside a structure designed to protect her from receiving the worst news imaginable in front of a live camera. That is the reality this family has been living since February 1st, 2026. And as of today, Nancy Guthrie has still not been found. There is a photograph that has stayed in the minds of everyone who has seen it. Released by the FBI on February 10th, 2026, it shows a figure standing outside Nancy Guthrie's front door in the earliest hours of February 1st. The figure is wearing a ski mask. long sleeves, black gloves, carrying a black Ozark Trail backpack, the kind sold at Walmart, chosen for its anonymity. The person's approximate height was estimated at 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches. Average build. Nothing distinctive about the clothing. Nothing that would make this person stand out anywhere in America except for the fact that they are standing masked and armed in front of an 84-year-old woman's door in the middle of the night. The doorbell camera caught 2 separate images, one without the backpack, one with it, suggesting the person had been to the vehicle and returned. This was not impulsive. This was a visit with a plan. FBI Director Kash Patel is the one who personally contacted Google leadership to obtain that footage. And the way that happened reveals one of the most uncomfortable tensions running through this entire investigation. Patel claimed publicly in a podcast interview that his agency was kept out of the case for 4 days after Nancy's disappearance. 4 days. He said he had a fixed-wing aircraft on the ground ready to transport DNA evidence to Quantico overnight, and that local authorities sent the evidence to a private lab in Florida instead. He said, "When we were finally let in, look what we did." Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos pushed back hard. His department posted a formal statement saying an FBI task force member was on the scene the very first night Nancy was reported missing. He said the decisions about evidence processing were made based on operational needs on the ground. He said the 2 labs had been working in close partnership from the beginning. 2 senior law enforcement officials, both publicly committed to finding Nancy Guthrie, publicly contradicting each other about the most basic facts of how this investigation was managed. Ask yourself why that matters. Not because one of them is necessarily lying, though that question deserves serious attention. It matters because when the 2 agencies leading a search cannot agree on when they began working together or where critical biological evidence should go, it raises a legitimate and painful question about whether the investigation had the coordination it needed from the very beginning. A hair sample recovered inside Nancy's home spent weeks being analyzed at a private Florida lab before it was transferred to the FBI's Quantico facility. Months passed before mixed DNA evidence from the scene was being processed. These are not small procedural footnotes. In a case involving an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and a heart condition, hours mattered, days mattered, and there is more. A Pima County assessor named Suzanne Drewby came forward to say that after the FBI contacted her office directly and requested property records to assist in the investigation, she received a phone call from Sheriff Nanos. She described the interaction as negative. She said it was inferred that by cooperating with the FBI and generating additional leads for them to follow, she was creating extra work for the sheriff's department. A local official, trying to help a federal investigation find a missing woman, was reportedly told that her cooperation was inconvenient. That account has never been denied outright. The sheriff's department has not addressed it specifically, but it sits there in the public record as one more detail that does not fit the picture of a perfectly unified task force racing toward justice. By May of 2026, the Pima County Board of Supervisors had moved to consider ousting Sheriff Nanos entirely, not solely because of the Guthrie case, but because of separate allegations of perjury. In a deposition connected to a lawsuit filed by the president of the County Deputies Union, Nanos allegedly stated under oath that he had never been suspended as a law enforcement officer. Public records from El Paso, later obtained by the Arizona Republic and posted to the county board's website, appeared to contradict that claim directly, showing multiple suspensions and a resignation in lieu of termination. The board cited an 1873 Arizona law as the potential basis for action. 2 supervisors said publicly that Nanos had already missed a deadline to answer their questions under oath. One of them said, "There's no going back." The man leading the most high-profile missing person investigation in the country was simultaneously fighting for his own professional survival. This is where things get serious in a way that goes beyond any single piece of evidence. The total reward for information in this case has now surpassed $1,200,000. The FBI has upgraded the case from a missing persons investigation to a homicide investigation. Volunteers crossed into northern Mexico following anonymous tips and searched for what was described as a possible grave site. They found nothing. The search continues in multiple directions with no confirmed suspect, no confirmed location, and no confirmed answer about what happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night she walked through her own front door for the last time. What do you believe happened? After everything you have heard across these 3 parts, the masked intruder who came prepared, the credible ransom notes that described her as dead, the institutional friction between 2 law enforcement agencies, the possible early misstep that sources inside the investigation are now calling a fatal error. What does your gut tell you? Drop your theory in the comments, not speculation for its own sake. But because in cases like this, sometimes the person who connects one overlooked detail to another is someone watching from home with a clear head and no bureaucratic pressure. Nancy Guthrie was someone's mother. She was a woman who had lived in Tucson for more than 50 years, who went to church, who had dinner with her family on the last evening anyone saw her alive, who was walked to her door by someone who loves her and waited until the lights came on before driving away. And then she was gone. Nearly 5 months later, she has not been found. Her family has not been given answers. Her daughter went back to work on national television with protocols in place to remove her from the set if the news broke while the cameras were rolling. That is the reality this family is living. That is the weight that sits on this case every single day it goes unsolved. The investigation remains active. A credible note said she was buried in nature. Volunteers searched Mexico. DNA evidence is still being processed. A masked suspect with a generic backpack and no identified name remains the only image law enforcement has released. And somewhere in Tucson, or beyond it, there are people who know something. Sheriff Nanos said it directly. We know somebody out there knows what happened here. If you know something, anything, call 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 5203-514-900. One tip is all it takes. That is not a figure of speech. That is how these cases break. Share this video, not for the views, because Nancy Guthrie's family is still waiting, and this story needs to reach the person who has the one piece of information that everything else is waiting on. Subscribe if you want to be here when this case breaks, because it will break. And when it does, you will want to have followed every step that led there. This story is not over, not even close.